beautiful downtown Natomas, which isn't all that beautiful, but it's not even downtown. Anyway, again, this is Donner Pass week 2, and let's get some things taken care of first. I have to apologize first. Last week, Lori and I discovered that if you guys are paying attention, you got to hear her parrot, her dog, her gardener, my wife, my doorbell, and my phone. So we have discussed things with my wife, and today we heard the pest guy. So if you hear any noises, it's just life going on, folks. Don't worry about it. Don't take it personally. And we'll just grit our teeth and move on. So business first, Friday forum. We got a detective this time, Matthew Doe. He's going to talk about elder fraud. And having worked with elders in my previous career, let me tell you, we are getting ripped off all the time. It's amazing what people do. And I'm sure I'm talking to somebody right now who I don't even know, who has been ripped off by somebody. So that's on Friday forum. Do yourself a favor and be a little quicker than me, because I missed last Friday forum after I shut my mouth off about it because I didn't sign in. I didn't enroll until about 2 o'clock on Friday, and you can't do that. So if you want to be there until Friday noon, you can sign in. So I'm sure it'll be good. Okay, and as always, the food pantry, they still take money, even though they take food and money donations, even though not too many people are there. So don't forget them. Okay. I must admit, looking at this food pantry, they ate much better than I did when I was in college. Much better. Okay, starting off, Donner Pass week 2, the early explorers, and this is the first success on the pass. This is a different picture of Donner Pass, looking at it from the east at the end of Donner Lake. And I'm assuming this is a place near a place called China Cove, which would be on the left. China Cove was so named because when they were building the railroad, the Chinese had a work camp down there where they lived after they worked when they went back at night. And the reason they had a work camp down there was it was too steep to get up there to where the tracks were. But a little tour. Donner Lake is what's in front of you. It looks like this is in spring. If you look to your right, that's the freeway. Underneath here is Highway 40, which was the Immigrant Trail before it was paved. Looking up here, you got Stevens Peak right there, which we'll talk about him today. Mount Judah, Mount Disney, I believe. I get them mixed up, but anyway, that's what's up there. And the railroad, as always, right there, and right there, and all the way around. And in the middle of it, well, let's see. We're going to talk about a gentleman named Elisha Stevens today. If you're going to be Elisha Stevens, this is how you get the big money, folks. You get hired to be the leader of a wagon train, and they pay you to lead them across, and you get to this lake, which was unnamed at that point, and then they say, where do we go now? And you look at it, and you take a deep breath, and you go, this is what you're going to say. Last semester, Lori did this. You're going to go right there. You're going to aim for the lowest spot, and that is Donner Pass, and that's what the aim was for. Not the aim was for, but that's when they walked down here to get around the lake or across the lake when it was frozen later. We'll talk about those guys next week. Your aim is right there. Later, the passes became over there, but we'll talk about them later. So at this point, that's where we're going. Okay, so the early explorers. And today's class, we're going to summarize it a little bit because we have to get back to topography, because today's when everything I told you last week comes into play. We'll talk about Jedediah Smith and Joseph Walker, Bidwell Bartleson, or Bartleson Bidwell, or Bodwell Biddleson. I always get mixed up, but anyway, that's what their name's supposed to be. Talk about Stevens, Townsend, Murphy, where'd they go, and week 2, things to do and places to see. And I hope somebody, when we send out the summaries of the week, whether or not you want to read them, save them, because someday you'll be up there and you can see some things that are easy to get at. So I recommend saving those things if you have any interest at all. You may not use them this week or next week or the next month, but you probably will sometime. So interesting thing about the High Sierra, it becomes a garden if you get the right time of year. And this is on the side of Donner Pass on the way up. Now, it's just amazing what it looks like. If you've ever been up there, Highway 40, you'll see that enough in the next 5 weeks. Great place just to garden. You can see it for many different reasons. Sometimes you just want to see it for the flowers. Okay, and last week to review, because this becomes kind of critical, we talked about rain shadows equal deserts, and this is the desert out past Reno. And we talked about the subduction and orogeny, the steep winding eastern slopes, which is where you see, I always see the bicyclists go down like bats out of hell. And that's why it's always steep on that side. And the straight, gradual western slopes, this is almost a fix. I mean, this is so straight. This is in Big Bend. This is like you couldn't get much straighter. And that's what helped them, as hard as it was to get across the mountains. One of the things that helped was the ridges going west. And so you got mountains that are going up. I think they're still growing too. You get large amounts of snow, which a lot of times certainly results in problems with the snow. But if you get enough of it, you get glaciation, which makes this all smooth and makes cliffs and rocks and makes it hard to move around. So that's the topography. We're going to deal with it, or no, we're not going to deal with it, but some people are going to deal with it this week. And then finally, and I won't do this anymore, I promise. This is the greatest quote, and you ought to hear it live, but I can't do it live because there's an obscenity right in the middle of it. So this is a guy named Herman K. Dupree. He was a snowmaking pioneer in Lake Tahoe. And he's got this, whoever said this quote, has got this great deep voice. And he says, at the end of the day, these mountains are still going to be there. They don't give a blank, 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 blank about your problems. In other words, when you're up there, take care of yourself. Nobody else is. Be careful. Okay, no more safety speeches. Okay, Jedediah Smith. Jedediah Smith rolled through, famous mountain man. There's a picture of him on the left, blew through that area in 1826, looking for the Buenaventura River. The Buenaventura River, if you haven't heard of it, that's because it doesn't exist. There was a school of thought for a long time, before it was debunked, that there was a river that went basically from Salt Lake all the way to the Pacific. And he who found it would have a whole lot of improvement in transportation. They could do trappers and stuff. All these guys would be a much easier trip, and they could get to the Pacific and life would be good. Well, as you well know, they never found it because it doesn't exist. But more than a few guys looked at it. He's important because he entered California. He was the first guy to arrive from California from the east, and he went through the Mojave Desert, which that must have been a thrill. But he went through the Mojave Desert. And let's see, looking at the left over here, before I get to what he finished up as, there is a sculpture of him. This is in San Dimas, California. And the picture was put up by the San Dimas Festival of the Arts. And I found this last semester. So if you're paying attention last semester to statues, what's happening to statues in the United States of America? They're being ripped down. So in the midst of the pandemic, I emailed the San Dimas Festival of the Arts group and said, quote, is that statue still there? And they actually answered. I got very few answers in the pandemic, part of the pandemic last year, but that statue called a welcome site, and Victor Issa sculpted it from 1992. And this is San Dimas is the area that he came into, the LA region. And the lady who responded says, as of last semester, it was still there. And the interesting part of that, one of the interesting parts of that statue is you can see in this picture above, you can see the left side of his face. And on the statue below that, you can see the right side of his face. And the interesting thing is, supposedly, he had the left side of his face chewed off by a grizzly bear, and he grew his hair long down here, which is kind of long over here, to cover it up. I've never seen a picture of his face chewed up by a grizzly bear, but I watch every time I come across a picture of Jedediah Smith. So he came to California, again from the east, came in through the LA area from the Mojave, and he departed California through the Ebbets Pass region, which, if you're not sure what Ebbets Pass is, that's out of Stockton and Angels Camp. And I always say, if you can't see if the Ebbets Pass is not the middle of nowhere, you can see it from there. It is nowhere out there. I mean, the road gets as skinny as your driveway. It's not a great place to break down if you want to break down someplace. And the interesting thing about him is he missed the Donner Pass, Tahoe area. Like everybody else that got to him, he had to go south. He had to get around. He had to get around the desert, at the 40-mile desert. So Jedediah Smith, though, but he moved. He proved somebody could get to California. So that's what his contribution for this, it was in 1826. Then we wait a while, and this guy shows up. This guy gives me a headache, and I'll tell you why here. Another trapper, Joseph Walker. If you look at his tombstone, it will say he entered California through the Yosemite area. Well, there's a whole book my wife gave me for Christmas that says he didn't do that at all. I'll tell you where he did go, because he did see cliffs and he did see big trees. But anyway, and he left California through Walker Pass, which is Kern Canyon, again, south. His claim to fame, as far as the immigrant trail, Donner Pass goes, he established the immigrant trail route from Fort Hall, Idaho, to almost the Truckee River. He got 40 miles away from the Truckee River, and then at that point, somewhere in there, he turned south. And coincidentally, it's 40-mile deserts. That's where he turned south, because of the desert. Now, he's an interesting guy. He's collateral to me. I was researching Joseph Walker and came across this story. The story was he and his group were coming across someplace in Nevada and were surrounded, according to their story, by 800 Paiute Indians. I don't know how they got the number 800, but a lot. And they weren't backing off, and Joseph Walker and his men got a little nervous, and somebody, the question is who, he said he didn't do it, but somebody started shooting, and 39 Indians were dead. 39 Paiute Indians were killed. And then they backed off, and he went on his way and went down south and went to California and did what he did. On the way back, he ran into some Indians again, and they had another incident, and 13 more were dead. So he took out 52 Indians. I don't know who was counting, but he took out 52 Indians on the way. So this started, again, this is, I call it collateral. He missed the Donner Pass, Tahoe area again. He was south. And he's out in obviously that's the picture of the Nevada desert. So I started thinking, and there was some references to him as not the nicest guy. So I started looking him up. I've had 4 opinions. The first opinion was on the internet, and I saw 2 websites, and then I saw the book about him. 2 say he was a homicidal maniac, and then 2 say don't even mention the fact of any difficulties with Indians. And the last one I saw mentioned he lived out the rest of his life in Contra Costa County, a gentleman farmer. So Joseph Walker, the jury is out. I don't think the jury will ever be back. But the one point that was brought up was a lot of the difficulty that immigrants had with the Native Americans could have started then, because he was one of the first guys to go through. There was nobody else. Very few people were coming through. So if nothing else, the animosity and so on could well have started then. It's a picture of Joseph Walker as a younger guy. So he missed the Donner Pass area too. Nice picture of him when he's old. He's on his porch. Okay, then you get
Bill?
parties. Yes, ma'am.
We have a question. Cindy wants to know, why wouldn't Jedediah Smith's statue still be there? Was he controversial?
Apparently not. That's what I was thinking too. And I guess maybe I was somewhat, that's a good question, Cindy, and I think maybe I was getting somewhat, let me think of the right word. Paranoid is not the right word. That's the only one I could think of. I was getting a little bit awash in bad things being done to Native Americans, and specifically California Native Americans. Without going into a whole lot of stuff, it became literally during and after the gold rush, a bloodbath in California. And I'm not a bleeding heart, and I don't weep at bad stories and stuff, but reading this stuff was beyond belief, just on and on and on and on and on. Just it was absolute complete slaughter of California Indians. So back to Jedediah Smith, I figured, probably because I wasn't that very much of a critical thinker at that point, well, he must have done something too, but apparently he didn't. Or they don't know or whoever tears down statues doesn't know it's there. But my thought was they were taking down every statue at that point, and he was around at that time, so maybe he was accused of something, but apparently he was not. I'm glad he's still there. Okay, after those two guys, there were a couple of parties that tried to get across. The one that had success was 1841, Bartleson Bidwell. If you are a Chico State person, and I know there's some in our audience here, this is your guy. This is your guy. His house is down here. If you went to Chico State and can remember it, I know my two daughters went there. I don't think they remember it very well. I don't want to know, but I have suspicion they had a lot of fun there. But anyway, Bartleson Bidwell where'd that go? They're the first party to get across the Sierra. They did not get across with their stuff. They did not get across with their wagons. They abandoned those, I believe, somewhere in the Owens Valley. He has one of the great quotes of all time. And this is probably one of the first guys. Imagine Neil Armstrong saying this. Our ignorance of the route was complete. They had no clue where they were going other than a longitude and latitude, a set of longitude and latitude coordinates. And I think they had a compass that took them west, but they did not know where they were going. They just kind of went. And there were trails you could follow. There were people who had gone out there, but once again, when you start getting in the desert, it gets a little tough. And that's where the sort of the rubber meets the road. Bidwell, by the way, became famous in California. He was known as a pioneer. He became famous as a lot of things. Pioneer, farmer, statesman, politician, a prohibitionist, a philanthropist, a gold miner, a candidate for president, a Democrat, a Republican. He was everything. He also got married in D.C. when everybody who was in D.C. was there when he got married. He was a big deal. And he became a big deal in California. But I will say, again, the Indian stuff, his name rolled through that too. I mean, I saw in a book I was reading, I don't know if he did anything, but he was just, they just seemed to be there. So I don't think there's much of, that's not a great answer. But anyway, so Bidwell, first ones, other people came across with them. Charles Weber came across. He found a Tuliberg, which was Stockton. Tuliberg's a cool name. I kind of wish it was still Tuliberg. Again, when you looked at Bidwell, how many things he was, look at all the things that Weber was. And this is not a complete list of Weber's life, but just to get an idea. He was pro-Mexican, then pro-American during the Bear Flag Rebellion. He was a staunch German Protestant until it became necessary to become a Catholic in California. Because don't forget, California was owned by Mexicans. He's an alien, if you want to call him. He's probably an illegal alien in California. He was a gold miner in Murphy's. He met the Murphy family there. He was a philanthropist. He probably suffered from severe depression and in later years, significant mental illness. And there is a picture of his house, which I assume was on Weber's Point. As actually a drawing of his house, I assume was on Weber's Point in Stockton. So he got around too. It must have been nice to be in California then. There weren't too many, only about 10,000 people. And you sort of got to do what you wanted to do. And we had her. Nancy Kelsey is probably as famous as anybody in this. And I got two things to say about Nancy when we get to the end. She crossed the prairie carrying a 1-year-old while pregnant with her second child. So Nancy Kelsey is tough. She is the first immigrant to deliver a baby in California, and she was known as California's Betsy Ross. If the names are in the way, behind the names here, at least on my screen, that's sort of the California Republic flag that she helped do. She's now buried in Southern California. And I think the Oregon California Trail Association just put a monument on her grave, which is kind of interesting, which we'll get to in a little bit. Okay, I have to do full disclosure here. This is my weird Bartleson Bidwell connection. 2 years ago, just about 2 years ago, my wife and I moved here, and we moved from Sonora. And in Sonora, we lived there for a long time. And there's a monument in downtown Sonora that talks about the Sonora Pass Trail and all that kind of stuff, and talks about Bartleson Bidwell. Just before I left, they put another monument, actually OCTA, Oregon California Trail Association, which we'll get to at the end of this today, put a monument up. Turns out the Bartleson Bidwell party went right past my house. So after all that time living there, I had no clue. They went flat right in front of my front door. So which makes me wonder what I'm doing here, but I'm doing this. But anyway, you never know what's going on. So that's my first full disclosure, not as good as the next one. But I don't have any particular bias for or against Bartleson Bidwell, but I have some questions about Nancy Kelsey, which again, we will get to. So here's the problem. They're all going south and they're all going north. They're missing Donner Pass. None of them went through Donner Pass. And here's the problem. The problem was the rain shadow, 40 miles of desert. miles, it should be 40 right there. And right here where the arrow is, the Humboldt State Wildlife Management Area, if you call that picture on the front, that was Humboldt Sink. It's where the Humboldt River disappears. The pioneers would follow the Humboldt River across Nevada. It would just peter out in the sand. Then you'd have nothing for 40 miles until you got down here. And they didn't know what they had after this. They didn't know it was 40 miles long. They didn't know until a certain event took place. But anyway, the problem is, so they went north, they went south just to get around this, And if you think about it, well, big deal, but think about it for a second. Think what's on the other side of Donner Pass. Sacramento's on the other side of Donner Pass. And what's around Sacramento? Gold and so on. So that's a tough way to go. Some people actually went to Oregon to go south, to go to Oregon, then turn south, or to go to LA and go north to get to the area. So it was a big deal. There was no way to get through, but somebody figures it out. Okay, and here's the visual from Humboldt Sink, 40 miles. Okay, and you get there to the Truckee River at today's Wadsworth, and this was the goal, to get there. Now, yeah. In the middle, the problem lies in what's between the sink and the river. These are pictures, black and white pictures. A gentleman wrote a book in 1997. Interesting pictures. This is Boiling Springs on the way. This is 20 miles into the 40-mile desert. And it's literally, excuse me, I'm gonna keep hitting my cursor. I'll keep my hands off. Boiling Springs is a geothermal plant. You can look in the background and see, you can see some vehicles or buildings back there, and maybe a vehicle too. Obviously, at the point the immigrants came through the 40-mile desert, this was a water supply. It was also a place to die, as animals would get hysterical and dive in. So they had some death there, but they could get the water and they could just take it out and let it cool off. So that was a water supply. It is one ugly place. You can go there, actually. You can go out to that geothermal plant and they'll let you wander around out there. So that's Boiling Springs. This, I think, is just fascinating stuff. This is a pioneer grave. And the guy who found this is what he said. And I think I mentioned last week, I don't know what I believe anymore, so I just listen to things. This is a pioneer grave, and the guy said to do this grave, they marked him with rocks. And he said, there's no rocks around here. So they had to go someplace to find these rocks. The classic death on the prayer in the desert, the way they were buried, there was a way to bury them. You bury them east-west, their head facing west, in the middle of the trail. And I think that looks like the trail to me coming right out of here. You would bury the deceased in the middle of the trail, take the wagons and run the wagons over the gravesite to basically camouflage it. And then you would go on. The camouflage being Indians digging it up, wildlife digging it up, and so on. So that was the way they buried them. And it kind of stands in that picture. It makes sense because you can see the trail coming at you. Now this to me is the bottom one, which says site of oxen death. This to me is in the level of, I always wonder about cadaver dogs, how these things can take so long. You can find dead people or dead people sites. According to this guy, he's right behind it, taking the picture. He says he calls them ecosystems. You can look out in the desert someplace and you could find this and this and this and this. And he said that the dirt is raised up some, the sand or whatever the surface is raised up. And that is the site of an animal dying. And whatever's in the body of the animal stays there for a long time, and you attract insects and stuff like that. So you can go through the desert and find the sites of where the oxen died. We'll get to a next slide in a second. We show there are a lot of oxen were dying. So this is not a place you go. I think I talked last week about, sometimes you could give your relatives a tour of Donner Pass if they want to go someplace. I don't think you're giving anybody a tour of the 40-mile desert. If you do, you have interesting relatives. Okay, so numbers from 1850. This was a count somebody made. The source is the Nevada State Park System. So this, in 1850, they counted 953 immigrant graves, over 1,000 dead mules, 5,000 dead horses, 3,750 dead cattle out in the desert. So I'm sure somebody was counting. Who am I to argue with the Nevada State Park System? But it was an ugly place to go. It was an ugly place to go. Alkali part of the desert. And down here is interesting. This is the Immigrant Trail intersecting the highway. This is an old picture. I think this is highway. Yes, you can see the road right there. Trail's going this way, which makes a lot of sense because you can see the train out there going that way. The trail and the train often paralleled each other and often got very close. So seriously, the black and white pictures kind of make it look worse. I mean, or maybe it makes it look more authentic, but it is a nasty place to go. Just going through there, you don't want to just get your 5 acres and exist out there. Okay, and Mark Twain showed up. And he's Mr. Hyperbole, Mr. Exaggeration, but he said, and this quote was like twice as long, I had to cut it down because Mark Twain does go on. It'd hardly be an exaggeration to say that we could have walked the 40 miles and set our feet on a bone at every step. Now, cut that in half and it's still a lot of bodies. It's still a lot of bodies. So, and this is somebody's rendition, an artist's rendition of what it looked like out there. You can still apparently find stuff. Not supposed to take it, but they say one of the common things you can find are they call them barrels, the copper rings around the barrel, around water barrels, because knowing full well when that container of water was done, that barrel of water was empty, they knew they were getting the water, so they just dumped it. So you can still find the rings out there somewhere. Okay, so this is what they did in the meantime. Yeah, the Child's Party was in the early 1840s. They went, again, they all start here. And it depends where they go. They went north. This guy went way up there and eventually came all the way down. This guy's one of the great parties of all time, not because of what they did, but he went with somebody else who hadn't been, he lived in Missouri before he came here. He left his family in Missouri, came back, met Childs. Childs lived by Napa, Hot Springs, Calistoga. And I can imagine these two guys in the hot spring drinking adult beverages, discussing what they were going to do. And the other guy said, why don't we go back to Missouri and I'll pick up my wife and my kids and I'll bring them back. As 18 years later. His wife didn't want to go. She already thought he was dead and she married somebody else. His kids didn't want to go. He had an infant he didn't know he had. That kid was now 18. I think the 18-year-old may have come with him. But I just love pioneers, always optimistic. Sure, it's only been 18 years. I'll go back. My wife will love to come. Sure. Okay, so Childs went that way. I'll get to Fremont in a second. Jedediah Smith went way down here. So he did Desert Primo, went from here into LA. Joseph Walker's down here in Yosemite. And I'll tell you what the book I read just said about that. One of the people in Walker's party had a diary. He talked about cliffs with water going over them. And he talked about giant trees, seeing giant trees. And so you translate that into where'd they go? I must have gone to Yosemite. And so that's on his tombstone now. And it's probably on a state historical monument someplace. Well, guy who was, I think, is professor in CSU up here someplace. This guy must have walked every place. This book about Joseph Walker's trip was amazing. He just went everywhere. And he would take the diaries and try to match the diaries up to places that they described. And he said he doesn't think Walker did it all. He said he went north, and he said Joseph Walker basically went to Calaveras Big Trees, and he made the point that the Grand Canyon of the Tuolumne, Stanislaus River Canyon, and let's see, River Canyon, those two are deeper in some places than Yosemite Valley, and they have waterfalls going in them. And then Calaveras Big Trees is way bigger. The amount of redwoods that they have in giant trees that they have in Yosemite, be more likely just to wander through those. So he figured he went to Calaveras Big Trees, took a left-hand turn, went down to Angels Camp, and kind of went down the river, the Stanislaus River, towards the valley. So I know where Joseph Walker went, but he never said he just saw Yosemite. Somebody else did. So he didn't go here. He probably went up here, which is kind of north of where Bidwell Bartleson went, Sonora Pass. And walking through, if you're ever up in the Immigrant Wilderness, that's a neat place, but boy, it'd be tough to walk through. And then finally, Big John, the Pathfinder, I say that with great sarcasm. He's a PR person's dream, the PR person being his wife. His wife was the greatest PR person going. She made him the second coming of the greatest explorer of all time. He was trying to get across, and he did various expeditions out here. There's some discussion whether he was doing expeditions to map things or to check it out to take it from the Mexicans. A lot of discussion about that. One of his trips, he ended up camped for the winter, tried to get across in the winter. He was in Grover's Hot Springs, which would be a cool place to spend the winter if you've ever been there. It's little hot springs and stuff. So he was in Grover's Hot Springs, and one of the things he did was, and you can find this, only I know where it is. There is right off Highway 88, there's a tree with a marker on it, and that marker has an imprint of a picture that was drawn by one of, I think, Fremont's map maker, a guy named Preuss, of a peak that he was looking at from this campsite. And somebody figured out that's where the campsite was. It's called Fremont's Long Camp, and it's right off Highway 88. I personally have been there. It's a little creepy place. It's out in the middle of nowhere, but you can get there without a whole lot of work. But anyway, so Fremont couldn't get across. He got some help and got across in the area of Carson Pass. He did not go to Donner Pass until after it had been breached, basically. And he said, I don't know if this is dramatic or not, but they talked about when Fremont came across the pass, he was going east, and he saw wagon wheels ruts, so he knew it had been across. So Fremont missed too. So you got Childs up here. These guys went south. He went way south. Everybody's trying to get here. The pass is there, and nobody could make it until somebody figures it out. 1844, the problem is solved. And I put a big circle here because this is a big deal. They figured out a way to get across and to get to here. And these are the guys that did it. This is the Stevens, Townsend, Murphy party. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those guys.
Hey, Bill.
Elisha Stevens, yes, ma'am.
We do have one question about Joseph Walker. And
Yes.
Patrick wanted to know, is the Walker River named after him?
I believe so. Yes, I believe so.
Thank you.
Yeah, he went that route south. It's amazing. You see the stuff. It's all historic. Okay, back to Elisha Stevens. These guys left from Council Bluffs, Iowa, and he was elected. And this is what, if you read George Stewart, he talks about these guys, elected captain of a stable and workable party. And George Stewart talks a lot about the fact they were stable and workable. Wasn't a whole lot of egos in this. Although somebody wasn't too impressed because he was described as the ugliest man, sorry for the spelling there, ever to cross the prairie. Slimly built, long neck with a misshapen head, long and narrow, unnaturally high crowned. He had a tremendous eagle beak, but I'm sure his mother loved him. He's just one funny looking guy. And he could lead. The bottom line was he could lead, and he was experienced. So he was the guy that they elected. Someone unusually, which we'll get to in a minute too, why they would elect him. So he was big. Then you got the Townsend guy, John Townsend. He was a doctor. And supposedly he was the only quote unquote professional in the group. I never quite figure out why he's in the, and you can be critical of me when you hear my next confession here, why he was in the group, the name, because he was just a guy with a couple of relatives. But anyway, common entrepreneur, he brought a lot of stuff to start a business. And he was the uncle of Moses Schallenberger. Doggone it. Which he shows up here pretty soon too. Uncle of Moses Schallenberger. So, and he does some stuff in California also. So he was a doctor. And then we get to this guy. This is Martin Murphy, okay? This guy was old. He was 59. He came to Ireland, from Ireland to Quebec in 1820. In 1840, he moved to Missouri. In 1844, he moved to California. And you know what, for the sake of his family, they were darn lucky they had the Pacific Ocean there, because I think he'd be in Hawaii by now. This guy just kept going. He just wanted to go. Murphy's brought 23 members of the party, and there's only 53. The group was composed of sons and daughters, in-laws, and children of all ages. And I would imagine, what they say now, 80 is the new 50, 100 is the new 80, whatever the heck it is. But I think 59 then was old. It was old. So and again, these guys were walking. They're walking across or riding. So he must have been in pretty good shape. Anyway, they were interested in religious and educational freedom, a healthy climate and land, lots of land. Okay, full disclosure. This guy is my great grandfather. Now I know what you're thinking. What the heck is this? This is a setup. This clown just dragged us into this. We could talk about his relatives. Not at all. Not at all. I need to tell you the story. This is basically how this took place. And I have to give you my perspective ahead of time. you guys can see, if you see that book is called To California by Covered Wagon, and it's written by a guy named George Stewart. Yeah, and it was written in 1954. And when I was a little kid, a little pudgy guy, with way more hair than I have now, I was reading this book. I must have been about 9. It's amazing to read these books, how bad they are. But anyway, I read this book. I actually found this in a used bookstore recently. And I was reading this book. And I was living in San Jose at the time. We lived near my grandmother. And one day I was carrying this book around, and my grandmother, who was not one to say no to, called me aside. And I automatically, being guilty about everything, figured I screwed something up big and it's gonna be all over for me. She looked at this book and started to give me a speech. And the speech was this: you know, the people in this book are your relatives. I was kind of surprised by that. And really, they, and she talked about how they went across the prairie and gave the Murphy family, because she was a Murphy, a real Murphy, there weren't too many Murphys left. She was a real Murphy, and gave the Murphy perspective on coming across the prairie and all the things, and the desert and all the things that they did, and how basically they did everything. And the only reason that Donner Lake is called Donner Lake is because those people, and I'm putting this in quotation marks, I didn't say it, she did, because those people ate each other, and that's how you get a name. You get a lake named after you, and you get a pass named after you, and that's how you get famous, because we didn't eat each other. No one even knows who we are. But the lake should be Murphy Lake, and it should be Murphy Pass. And she went through this whole thing here, and I listened, and I sort of took the Kool-Aid here. Thinking back then, I suspect you could give it a different name. We'll talk about names in a second. So I heard all this stuff, and then in San Jose, in the area of San Jose and Sunnyvale, Murphys are all over the place. They founded Sunnyvale, which we'll get to a little bit later. So I guess what I wanted to say was, if I get hysterical during this and start talking about Martin Murphy should probably be on the top of the Vatican, or his wife should probably be canonized as a saint in the church, I'll have Lori just slap me around a little bit, and I'll get back to normal here. I will try to be black and white and not show favoritism here, even though, well, enough. Okay, so Martin Murphy. So you got the Stevens Townsend Murphy party, and I'm not going to trace the whole way across from Council Bluffs. They got some great videos, by the way. If you want to look at Nevada and the Platte River, or Nebraska and the Platte River on YouTube, you can see where they went. Anyway, they went to Independence Rock, which, if you know about, that's in Wyoming, and you are supposed to be at Independence Rock if you're an immigrant party on the 4th of July. Well, guess what? They were there on July 7th when they had a baby. And as my grandmother said, some people died coming across the pass. We had more people we had more people born on the pass. We arrived with more people than we left. So she was much impressed, and they called this young lady, Ellen Independence Miller. Her father was a Miller. Her mother was a Murphy, one of Martin Murphy's daughters. So she was born on July 7th, 1844, which means they were right on time. That's where they were supposed to be. Their trip went through the usual places, the City of Rocks in Idaho, which must be an interesting place. I may go there this year. City of Rocks, went through there, and eventually went through followed the Humboldt River down and got to the 40-mile desert and stopped. And they stopped until they met this gentleman. He was described, the incident was described as, we stopped, they didn't know where to go. Nobody had gone there yet. They didn't know where to go. And they said, a friendly Paiute. And it's funny how they talked about friendly. It must have been getting ugly, because when they describe a guy as a friendly Paiute came up, and through various and sundry ways, sign language, I would assume, explained that if you went across the desert for 40 miles, you would find a river. And if you follow that river up into the mountains, you will get to a lake. And if you get past that lake, you can go up the mountains and cross into the other side. And that's what they were told. And we don't know if his name was Truckee. He said the word Truckee. They think Truckee means like okay, or I understand, or something, but they gave him the name Truckee, and hence the river, obviously. But he sort of got them through Nevada, okay, to California, and now they get here. So they are now in California, and let's get the part, since we're in California, let's talk about what they did here and what you can see, because that's the idea here. They did go up the Truckee, and it took them a long time. Truckee was nasty. It was so nasty that when one of the people came back in the spring after this, after the winter was over, he immediately found another way to get around the Truckee River for the future parties, because Truckee was nasty. They were in the river. They lost cattle. The cattle suffered. The cattle's feet got soft. They were bleeding. They couldn't go any further. They got up to the end. They got back on the land. This is the Immigrant Trail going to the confluence. This, by the way, is like about 5 feet from civilization here. It's in Truckee. I'll show you where it is. You can see this anytime you want. It's right through, I wouldn't say the heart, the outside of Truckee. And this is the Immigrant Trail going to the confluence of Donner Creek and Truckee River. So if you recall what they were told, you go up the river and you'll get to a lake. He didn't tell them about this. There's a split. So they're now in Truckee. Before I finish that discussion, this is where they were. Truckee High School is right here. Donner State Park is right about over here. That's Highway 80. This is Highway 89 going to Squaw Valley. And let's see if I can be really clever with this and make this bigger. Yeah, I can. Donner Creek is right there, and it comes out right there. So this is that empty space you just saw. This is where they merge, I guess you don't confluence. This is where they came together. You can go park right next to it, and you can walk down and commune. I do that every so often because I have no life. But anyway, you can ponder what went on here and so on. So they stopped here, and they said, remember, you go up the river, you find a lake. Well, I'm sure they had scouts out. They must have known that there was a lake not very far. And I don't know if they knew there was a lake this way, but what they did at this point was they split. They sent 6 members, 4 men, and 2 women, called the Horseback Party, and they followed the river. The remaining, let's see, 47, the remaining 47 went this way, and it is not a long trip. Donner Creek's right here. It's not a long trip to get to Donner State Park, which is where they ended up. So basically they covered their butts. Let's go both ways. And if we don't make it, you will. And we can get somebody who could get help, I think is what the idea was. So they split. So let's follow the Horseback Party. So the Horseback Party basically comes down 89. And I don't know if they knew this was coming. This arrow should be over there. But anyway, right about there, Tahoma. Went down the western side of the lake, and eventually, as it says here, came down the Truckee River. They became the first immigrants to visit Lake Tahoe, and then went from McKinney Creek. You can go to McKinney Creek now and find Chambers Landing Bar and Grill and have a wild time. So you can hang out there, and then you can get back into history and walk up McKinney Creek. But they turned right there, and went to the Rubicon, which is up here. Now, I have an asterisk here, which I'll get to in a second. This is a current picture of the Rubicon Trail, but this is essentially the route they followed. They may have been over here, or they may have been over here. But basically, that trail was already there. It was already there, done by Native Americans. And they just followed that way into the American River Canyon and went from there. So they're up in this stuff. Must have been an incredible trip to see all this stuff that you'd never see anyplace else. So they're on the Rubicon Trail, on their way, hopefully, to Sutter's Fort. Okay, now I have an asterisk here, and I did, if anybody read the summary, I asked a question about the connection Ellen Murphy and John C. Fremont had. Did anybody get an answer? You can text it if you want. I'll give you the answer. Anybody want to say anything, Lori?
I don't have anybody responding on chat.
Okay.
And
Obviously,
I can't see, I don't see any raised hands.
that's okay. Obviously people aren't doing their homework, but that's okay. Okay. The question is John C. Fremont and Ellen Murphy. John C. Fremont, when if you recall a few minutes ago, we talked about how he was in Grover's Hot Springs and got to cross the Sierra. Well, one of the things he did when he was trying to cross the Sierra, when he went to the top of Red's Peak, which is right by Highway 88, and he got to the top and he looked north and saw this big lake. And he was the first guy, first settler, first non-Native American to to see Lake Tahoe. And he wrote that down, said there was a big lake up there. That was February of 1844. In December of 1844, the horseback party with Ellen Murphy in it goes down the Truckee River and comes to Lake Tahoe. And that was February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October. 10 months later, they show up and they see Lake Tahoe. So my grandmother had a perspective on that. She said they discovered it, which was nuts. They didn't discover it. But I always say they were the first settlers to freeze their feet off when they got there. So whoever discovered it, do you discover it when you're 12 miles away, or do you discover it when you get to it? I don't know. The obvious thing is the Native Americans discovered it, but that's their connection. And there's 5 other people that are there also. There's some discussion, might have been Daniel Murphy, but that's okay. Ellen Murphy comes back, by the way. She has other things to do here in a little bit. So Rubicon Trail. So they're up there in the middle of the Rubicon Trail. And let's move on. Let's move to the other guys. So now you got 47 people moving to Donner Lake, which is unnamed at that point. And there was actually some Stevens, Townsend, Murphy party art. You will see next week, the Donner Party is, as my grandmother used to say, filthy with art. Well, the Stevens, Townsend, Murphy Party is not filthy with anything. Okay, this is called Moses Schallenberger's cabin at Truckee Lake Camp. Jenny Ryder, Palamas, 1880s. He described it to her and she wrote it from his directions. So, and this cabin, which is he did say it had on the top, it had skins. It's a heck of a chimney. I don't know, this thing didn't take that long to make, I would assume. But anyway, that's what how he described it. I assume this is him because he got to stay there. We'll get that in a second. And the site of it now, if you go to Donner State Park, where the monument is, that's where that cabin is. Okay, that's where it was. I'm not quite sure about the creek there. I know behind it's kind of swampy, but anyway, could have been artistic license. That's how I started learning about artistic license here. So anyway, this is Moses Schallenberger's cabin here. Now, what happened with him was this. There were 13 wagons in the Stevens, Townsend, Murphy party. And they had a meeting. These guys had meetings, and I guess they came to conclusions. They decided that about half of them would stay, they leave their wagons there, and then half would try to get across with their wagons. They're very interested in getting their wagons across because they had stuff in them. So they decided to leave 3 people here. Moses Schallenberger being like, I think he was 16. Imagine your 16-year-old grandson. Let's leave him in the middle of the Sierra where there's nobody for the entire winter. Well, they left 3 of them there. 2 of them, and to make a long story short, 2 of them left because they thought they were going to starve, and he got sick and couldn't leave, so he had to stay. So he stayed the entire winter. That's called the Schallenberger cabins. That's what he did. In the meantime, I don't know if they made this cabin first and they got the wagons up or whatever, but in the meantime, the remaining wagons had to get across the Sierra, and this is up the wall to the pass, and this is artistically speaking. This is called the Murphy Party Ascending the Sierra, Andrew Hill, and this is 10 feet by 6 feet. I would love to have one of these things on my wall. I think that would complete my life. Just what a cool wall. But anyway, this burned up in the earthquakes. You can't have this one anyway. Anyway, this burned up. It was in the historical room of the California Pioneers Association. And if you look at this, you talk about artistic license. I love this. Start looking at this part. Okay, so we got, by the way, no train. You don't see that very often. Got the lake right, and this, you can see this perfect. This is still there. It's as the road goes around, this is actual Highway 40 goes. Let's first of all, I say 6 wagons they brought over. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think that's 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8. Okay, maybe. There's teepee right there. I suspect there wasn't one there, especially when you consider Native Americans did not stay in the Sierra in the winter. There's now snow on the ground. That's one of the reasons they stopped at the lake. There's now snow, and they wanted to make sure that they didn't think they'd get across in the snow. Then you have over here a couple of Native Americans. So you got all sorts of stuff here, but the basic thing you have is no snow. So this is Andrew Hill's version of this. Okay. There's another one. You see this on posters around. I bet you there's probably one in the museum at Donner Pass. Used to have this in my den. This is taking the wagons apart to get up the pass. One would wonder about this particular element or piece of furniture. why that thing wasn't dumped in the middle of the desert. That must have been heavy. The Stevens Townsend Murphy Party, for those of you that are into technical stuff, did not take their wagons apart. They pulled the wagons up. Schallenberger, who was the guy who gave the information, later said they did not take the wagons apart. But parties after that did. So this may have been other people. There's a bookcase up here, bookshelves, I think. These guys must have been awful tired lugging this stuff around. But you see the evidence of the glaciation. This is all results glaciation, just cliffs, rocks, and so on. It must have been a drag. You can walk it now. And it's kind of, they've made roads and done some modifications to the area, but it's serious business. Okay. Now the railway, this is where Mark and Sue went last week. Remember Mark and Sue? This is the top of Summit Canyon, the China Wall, and the railroad. Doggone it. Excuse me. China Wall being this, railroad being that, and China Wall being that. The two parts of it went right up here. Mark, I think, walked on top of this stuff. So that's where they went right through here, and the Immigrant Trail is right there. Walkable to this day. You could walk it. I don't want to walk it today, but snowshoes, you could probably walk it today. So that's the way they went up. And again, you can do that at the end of this presentation. I will give you some information on how to do it, and it's worth doing. It is worth doing. Okay. I think you saw this last week, the Stevens Townsend Murray route to the top. They kind of wandered around down here. You can see part of the trail. That's a new road they built, road since. But anyway, up here, right down here, around there, and down to, which is the next slide. So they made that, and they kept going. There was no, hey, we made it. They kept going, and this is the top of the pass. I would imagine, I suspect it wasn't this flat. This is flat because the Lincoln Highway was on it at one point. But it's probably overgrown. It's overgrown now. It probably looks somewhat the same. It's pretty much overgrown. I gotta stop touching the cursor. It's pretty much overgrown. Going over the top because the pass connects one place to another, as we talked about. You go down the other side, the pass being over here, and they went into follow the Yuba River. Starts up in the headwaters of the Yuba River, or right about there. So they start following the Yuba. You can do this too. Get there late in August because it's a sponge until August. My wife and I are wandering through, and water was squirting up under our feet. Used to be a Van Norden Lake. People used to water ski and stuff, but they took the dam down. You ought to hear the locals talk about the decision to take the dam down. They are not a happy crowd when you ask about the U.S. Corps of Engineers. Anyway, the trail went right over here. There was the greatest piece of Immigrant Trail over here. It is like nobody was ever on it. There's no car tracks. There's no nothing. It's just nothing there. It's great, and it's not very far. There's a road, highway, there's a highway here, and I believe Highway 40 is over there. You can drive almost to the end. It's a very short walk over to here, which I'll tell you about that too. But anyway, this is the Summit Valley. Let me make reference to that. Indian grinding stones are in there. Interesting place. See the train over here. Lots of stuff going on. Lots of stuff. And they follow the Yuba River, which is kind of what they did. A lot of following rivers all the way across the country, and they're trying to get to Big Bend. So they get to Big Bend. This is the Hampshire rocks, which if you've seen them, you know them. They're stunning rocks, just amazing rocks. They're not quite sure who named them because Hampshire is in New Hampshire. Great campsite there. It's one of the most beautiful campsites I've ever seen. Facing it, if you turn around the other way, the freeway is 50 yards away, and it sounds like you're in a carburetor all day. It is so noisy. If you have noise canceling headphones, it's a great place to camp. Otherwise, go look at the rocks and go someplace else. It is way noisy. And you got the train on the other side to drown out the cars. So it's quite the place. Anyway, neat trip though. Right next to the road, next to Highway 40. Okay, so they get to Big Bend. If you look at this picture over here, I had one guy tell me, I'll get that in a second. So Big Bend, they did what seemed to happen all the time in the Stevens Townsend Murphy party. They had another baby. Elizabeth Yuba Murphy was born on about December 1st, 1844. At that point, they stopped. They came right over this granite. There's no way they stopped. I was up there once. There's a map we'll see next week of a guy who came across this trail in 1846, the year before, 2 years for a few months before the Donner Party did. He mapped the whole thing out, and he's literally got a cabin at Donner Lake, which is where Schallenberger hung out, and he's got a cabin here, which is what these guys built. They stopped for the birth of the baby. And so they made a cabin, probably out of wagons, I would imagine. They made a cabin, had to be down here. One guy told me, we know for a fact it was right there underneath that, which is garbage. We don't know where the heck it was. But it had to be down here because it's all flat. And this is the road I showed you. So it's flat and it's dirt. So they came across this, and down here somewhere, they made themselves a cabin. Elizabeth Yuba Murphy was born. She returns later too. She was born, called her Lizzie Yuba, and she died very young. Interesting life. But anyway, so she was born. Now they have 2 babies, 47 people. Don't forget, they got 6 floating around the middle of the Sierra someplace. And they got 40 now, and they got Schallenberger. So you got 46 now. And you got one guy at Donner Lake or Truckee Lake, whatever they wanted to call it. And you got the rest of them here. So the question is, what do you do now? Before we get to what do you do now, I want to stop, see where everybody is, because it gets confusing. If you look at this map, starting from the cursor here, northeast or northwest of Lake Tahoe, Moses Schallenberger is by himself guarding the wagons right there. You go down about 12 miles, it's not very far. They didn't make it very far. In Cisco, little west of Cisco is Big Bend. And that's where you've got 46 people stopped building a cabin because they had this baby. You have 6 in the middle of the Sierra. Don't forget, they came over from Tahoma, basically, and came this way. So they're probably trying to work their way down here, but nobody knows where they went. But anyway, so they're over here. And the goals are get to over here, which is Johnson's Ranch. Notice I didn't say Sutter's Fort. If you come on the Immigrant Trail over Donner Pass, you go to Johnson's Ranch first. Sutter's Fort's down here. So you make a turn and you take a few more days and you get down here. But essentially at this point, you got one guy here, 6 people here, 46 people here. And the question is, what do they do? Well, that's what these guys did. They made themselves a cabin, and 17 of the men left, figuring to get down here, to bring some help back. So I'm going to stop for a second, and this comes up next week, but I wanted to show it now. I got Immigrant Gap, the life-saving choice. If you came down right, Big Bend's right about there. You came down, the biggest move you ever make is right there. If you're familiar with 80, think of when you go up 80 and you'll see a sign that says Immigrant Gap and it gives a direction. If you take the wrong way, you end up in the American River Canyon. If you take the right direction, you go down this hill, which is what they did. And then you follow basically along Lowell Ridge, which you can follow the whole trail down Lowell Ridge right behind Dutch Flat, which is down here. And basically it wends its way down to Johnson's Ranch. So keep in mind, I keep my hands off this thing. Keep in mind Immigrant Gap. Immigrant Gap comes into play next week. It's a life-saving choice. It's also a killer. So let's see. Let's move to the next one. Yeah, in the meantime, so you got 17 guys left. They're going to go get some help. Well, they came down and there's a war going on, a very small war. A lot of people laugh at it, but basically it was the Michael Torina War. It was basically who was going to run California from Mexico. So you had 2 forces. You got Jose Michael Torina. He was the pro-Mexican government, and you got Juan Alvarado, the anti-Mexican government. The people in California, the Californios, were fans of Juan Alvarado because he ignored Mexico. Mexico's very far away. Jose Michael Torina was not especially popular, but he had one guy, Sutter, liked him because this guy gave away land, and Sutter liked land. So Sutter was supporting him. So these 17 men on horseback left the rest of them. So it was 46. That's 29 people now. Are 2 men and women and children are left. They leave them up at Big Bend. The 17 find their way down, working their way towards the valley, and they walk into a war. A small war, but a war nonetheless, described as a war. They meet Sutter. He is thrilled because Sutter wants to begin the war too, because Sutter wants his land. Michael Torina loses. Sutter's got some problems here. And I think Michael Torita did sort of get left out, but Sutter survived for a while. So he goes, I need some help. He's got 17 men with guns. Not a lot of people in California. 17 men would make a difference. 17 men would make a difference. Whether he said, you guys can have some land if you come with me down to LA. Didn't call LA, down to Southern California where there was going to be a battle. There was a battle down there. I'll give you guys some land, or I'll put you in jail if you don't. And by the way, don't worry about your wives and children because they got plenty of cows up there. They'll be fine all winter long. I wouldn't want to be up there now, much less then. So he said that women and children would be fine. And I need you to come with me. So they went with him. So instead of going back to rescue their families, they got their stuff and they went south. And they got all the way south of Monterey. I'm not sure if it was Santa Barbara or wherever it was, but it's down there someplace. They went down there and they didn't go very fast. This is horses. They didn't go very fast. They decided enough was enough. Said we're leaving. The guy said, Sutter said, okay, I guess it wasn't going, especially, wasn't a big problem. And then they went back up to Sacramento. And Sutter's Fort, Sacramento, went back up to Sutter's Fort. So they got basically detoured, and this cost them a lot. This cost them a lot of time. Okay, so let's see what happened to all of them. Okay, the horseback party took 2 weeks, and they got themselves to Sutter's Fort. They got there. They were there, actually, when the other guys showed up. They got themselves to Sutter's Fort, the two women and 4 men. And you got to appreciate those 2 women. They must have been nails. I actually named my daughter after one of them. They must have been nails. So the horseback party got down there. Then the guys at Big Bend, the ladies and the children at Big Bend left with Martin Murphy Sr. and John Miller. And those are the 2 people they're left with. They stayed there. And they stayed there, and for a couple of months, they stayed there, waiting for these guys to come back. The men, and so waiting, and then you got the men and the war. They came back. They immediately, I hope immediately, took a right-hand turn at Sutter's Fort, went back up to the Sierra and rescued and brought out the remaining people. What I always wanted to know was, I just imagined my wife up there and me gone for a couple of months. And I come up and she goes, where have you been? They were eating leather at that point by the time they got there. This was getting ugly. They were eating leather. And I said, well, I had to go to a war. I went down, took a trip down south because I was told to be in a war. It would not have been a good scene. It would have been ugly. It would have been pretty ugly. So, but anyway, they brought them out, went out, took the immigrant gap down to the Bear River, followed the Bear River Trail, and got themselves to Johnson's Ranch, which is what this is. This is what's left of Johnson's Ranch, which is nothing. I think they keep it a secret. So it's privately owned. There may be a well on it because there was quite a city here at one point because the people coming across the pass all came through there. So it was quite the city. Repairs, food, and that kind of stuff. And finally, you had Moses Schallenberger. Don't forget, he's stuck up at Donner Lake by himself. Well, he was there for a few months. They read a lot of books from Dr. Townsend. Dr. Townsend had a lot of books. He learned how to trap, fox, coyote, and they got some birds too. See, a coyote tastes like you think it would. We said it was horrible. Fox wasn't bad, and I think he just did what he could do with the coyote. So, and he went back. He went back with the group out of Big Bend. So he ended up also at Johnson's Ranch. And eventually, after you go to Johnson's Ranch, you take a left-hand turn and you cross the Feather River and you and you get yourself down to Sutter's Fort. There's a picture in the 1840s. I was surprised how it didn't look more less developed. I was surprised how developed it looked. If you look at the rest though, there's nothing there, just empty. And I assume this must be the American River because the American River was much closer to it then than it is now, I assume. Anyway, so they eventually got to Sutter's Fort. And the real question becomes, big deal. Why is this guy spending an hour and 5 minutes talking about some guys I never heard of? Okay, the reason being, those of us in the know, and not just me, historians know, so what? The Stevens, Townsend, Murphy, they did 2 things. A functional route to California had been found. That was the big deal. And functional, I mean, the next one, bringing your belongings, making large scale immigration possible. It's kind of like, think of going to the moon. We haven't done much of the moon because we can't live there yet. When we get to live there, that's when we start doing stuff with the moon. Well, this was kind of like going to the moon. And when they got there, they brought their stuff. They got the 6 wagons, I think were Big Ben. They brought them out. They went back in the spring to get Schallenberger's wagons that he guarded. Everything was gone. They had been looted, except for the guns, strangely enough. The guns were all still there. But they did get their stuff across. So welcome to California. And the welcome mat's been open ever since, although apparently now we're going backwards. People are going the other way now, which I guess always happens. So it was welcome to California, and life was going to change a whole lot for a whole lot of Californians, Californios, and Native Americans. So the question becomes, where'd they go? And before we decide where they go, let's take a 5-minute break. Okay, folks? So 5 minutes, be back at 1:11, okay? So I'm going to finish up with Larry, okay? Oh, I should do Patrick. Let me know when you want to go with him.
Either one. I think you were in a conversation with Larry, so maybe you wanted to
Larry's
complete that.
muted, so. Larry.
I thought since there was a break, I told you didn't want to comment while you're doing presentation. So it was just a question between you and me.
That's a good question, Larry. The only thing I think of is, Larry, when you go down 80, Larry's question was, how do they know to go to Johnson's Ranch? You're the first guys to do it. It's a darn good question. The only thing I could think of is if you go down 80 and you look to the right, you're probably going to see green grass. That's what I started figuring out, because it's a big drop. You go down into the Bear River Valley. I would imagine, knowing they had to get to where the elevation was lower and they had to get to the valley and to get to Neath, it probably looked like an easier place to go. And for all I know, that could have been a Native American trail from the word go anyway. So I don't know. The only guy that knows is Moses Schallenberger, and he wasn't talking. He did talk, and he never explained that. So that's a lousy answer to a good question there.
All
Thank
right,
you.
we want to have Patrick go ahead and unmute, and he can ask his question.
Maybe you covered this, but if the STM party was the first one to establish this functional route, what about Sutter and how did they get there? And Johnson and Johnson Ranch, was their route not considered functional?
Sutter came by boat. He came from Hawaii, and I think
Okay.
I think he went down from Oregon, I believe, but he came the back way. The other routes you could take, you could go as the what we talked about at the beginning. He could have gone south down to LA and come, not LA, but the LA area, and come north. He could have gone to Oregon and come south. That's the only other way they went at that point, unless there's something we don't know. And he could have come by boat too. I don't know how much the boats were coming, ships were coming at that point, but you just came another way. Yeah.
Thanks.
It's another bad answer to a good question, but anyway, that's the only thing I can tell you.
Bill, can I help out there quickly?
You certainly can.
The Johnson cutoff was a variation of the
Oh, that's right.
Carson route,
That's right.
which went south of Lake Tahoe and down along what we call 50. That does
Mhm.
not get developed until
Later.
1846, 2 years later,
That's
during
right.
the Mexican-American War, when the Mormons are heading back east.
Mhm.
They pioneer that route.
Yeah. This was the way. Donner Pass was it, or whatever pass you want to say. Okay, moving along. Anybody else? Patrick, are you done? I see your hand still there. Okay, guess you're done. Okay.
We don't have any other hands up or chat questions, so unless, Patrick, your hand's still up, did you want to say anything else?
No, just take
Okay.
it down here. There we go.
Okay,
All
where'd
right.
they go? Jedediah Smith, a few years later, he died on the Santa Fe Trail. He was apparently killed by Indians, and took care of him. He was done. He did die at a reasonably young age. I'm still looking to see if the left-hand side of his face is chewed up. I still don't know that. Joseph Walker, as I said, lived to a ripe old age in Contra Costa on his ranch. There's a great picture of him in a rocking chair on his porch. And the question is, how much of a homicidal maniac was Joseph Walker? I don't know. And a pass for him, there's a monument for him way down south at Walker Pass down in Kern County. John Bidwell, famous guy, Chico State, His wife, I believe his wife gave the land. I think she was more involved than he was for Chico State. He ran for president, things I talked about. He did well. He was around, did a lot of stuff, worked for Sutter for a while. Famous guy. It's funny, there's not a California Hall of Fame that I know about, at least the most popular ones. They don't have pioneers in it, which is an interesting question too, but Bidwell would be in one. Bidwell would be in. I want to skip Nancy Kelsey to get her to the end. Charles Weber founded Stockton. He went to mine gold, met a bunch of guys named Murphy up in Murphy's, married Ellen Murphy, who came in the group of 6, who came across the Sierra in the horseback party, married her, and they lived in Stockton and did whatever they did in Stockton. Elisha Stevens was a sad guy. He went through the pass, went first to San Jose. And if you go Stevens Creek Boulevard, which is not spelled correctly, it's spelled with a V. You go way out Stevens Creek Boulevard, past all the car dealerships and all that kind of stuff, out to Cupertino, and there's a park way out there. And that's where Elisha Stevens' ranch was. He was way the heck out there. He raised animals and did stuff until the Santa Clara Valley got too many people for him. And he was getting kind of disgusted. I think he started to resent the fact that this whole Donner business was later. He got no credit for that. So he went down to Bakersfield, and where he lived out his days, there's a monument by his grave. They found it. It took a long time to find his grave. They did find his grave, and he has his monument in Bakersfield. There's now a Stevens Peak above Donner Pass. There was a whole lot of work to put forth to give the peak that name, but there's a guy you think they should have paid more attention to him. They should have paid more attention. Martin Murphy and family did really, 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 really well. They said there was a discussion at some point that said at some point in the 1800s, you could walk from the Bay Area to Santa Barbara and never get off Murphy land. You think of Morgan Hill. Morgan Hill married Diana Murphy. You think of Marin County. We get to them in a second. Sunnyvale. They're down in Bakersfield. They were everywhere. They went back into the Nevada desert. One of the Murphy guys was supposedly the largest cattle farm rancher in the world. They did really, really well. And all that stuff came down to one decrepit house on their ranch site in Sunnyvale, which was torn down in 1961, I believe. I remember playing at it at the dedication. They had a big ceremony about this house that was going to fall, that they were going to tear down. And I remember as a kid just running around playing it. They had big palm trees in the front, which are still there. So they tore down the house, and strangely enough, a few years later, built a museum, a Sunnyvale Museum, which is pretty much dedicated a whole lot to the Murphy family. And the front of the museum just looks just like Martin Murphy's house. So big in Sunnyvale, if you know the street names, there are a lot of Murphy names in the streets of Sunnyvale. So he did well. He had a 50th anniversary. He was pretty much shut down. He invited 10,000 people to his 50th anniversary when he died, and that pretty much shut down the Bay Area. His funeral was huge when he died. He was a big deal. His family were involved in politics all over the Bay Area, in the state politics, creation of the state. So Martin Murphy did an amazing thing. The family story is that he could not read and write. I cannot imagine this guy couldn't read and write. He sure acquired land. And he had a whole lot of resources for a guy that couldn't read and write, but did a lot of stuff. And I said my grandmother, I think, was one of the last Murphys. There are no Murphys anymore. Too many females, not enough males in the family. Dr. John Townsend. I never think of Dr. John Townsend, except one day I went to a Giants game, and I'm walking. We stayed at a hotel. I wanted to see two games. Stayed at a hotel on the Embarcadero. Walked under the Bay Bridge to go to what was then AT&T Park. Had breakfast at this restaurant. I can't think of the name anyway. But it was a bunch of guys who are in rehab. I'm sure somebody knows the name. It slipped my mind. So I had breakfast there, walked out and looked down at my feet, and there were 3 plaques. And the 3 plaques were all about John Townsend. Dr. John Townsend went to San Francisco, became big in San Francisco, was a physician there, died in the cholera epidemic. And he and his wife both died in the cholera epidemic after they had gotten to San Jose. They moved down to San Jose. They died in the cholera epidemic in the early 1860s, I believe. And he had a couple of kids, and his kids were adopted by his nephew, who was Moses Schallenberger. He of the I'm going to stay all winter long at Donner Lake. So Moses Schallenberger was living in Santa Cruz. He came back to San Jose, and he raised John Townsend's two kids. There's a Schallenberger Road in San Jose. There's a Schallenberger Ridge right above Donner Lake. And Schallenberger is mostly famous, and this must really have irritated my grandmother, because in his late in life, he dictated his story of the Stevens Townsend Murphy party to his daughter. And he talked to Bancroft, the historian. And so his history of the Stevens Townsend Murphy is the history of Stevens Townsend Murphy. Nobody else wrote a thing. I think they have a couple of quotes from Martin Murphy later, but Schallenberger, he who writes the history, that's who becomes famous. And he did. And that's why one of the reasons that he became known and is known to this day. And had a long life in San Jose. And again, Schallenberger Road is out there. Caleb Greenwood was in the party, and he theoretically did something. You talk about who writes the history. I took a class last semester, 2 semesters ago, in the history of Lake Tahoe. And one of the things we did at the end was we took a field trip to Truckee. And a lady came out who gave us a tour of Truckee. It was a really interesting tour. And she said, I'm not going to talk about the Donner Party. I'm going to talk about the Stevens Townsend Murphy Party. At that, I almost fell over because nobody talks about the Stevens Townsend Murphy Party. And she talked about them getting to the Truckee area and said, when they got to the 40-mile desert, Caleb Greenwood knew sign language, talked to the Indian called Truckee, and they figured out by drawing in the sand how to get themselves to the lake, over the pass, and so on. I told her later I had heard that story a zillion times in my family and never heard the name Caleb Greenwood. Never. And I'm sure she was right. And just tells you who tells the story gets to tell the story and gets to make what the story is. So Caleb Greenwood apparently was that guy. He also did something, a bit of a capitalist. After the Stevens Townsend Murphy got to California, he did, and he had a son. This guy's 80 years old riding around on a horse. He turned around and went back. He went across the Sierra, and he devised a new way to get from Reno to Truckee without going up the Truckee River. It's called the Dog Valley Cutoff, and the Lincoln Highway went there. We'll get to that later too, but he found it to avoid the Truckee River. He found that way, and then he went back to Fort Hall, which is a place to stay on the trail, and talked to people who came across and tried to sell his services to them as a guide. So he's a total capitalist. Okay, William Miller, doggone it, I apologize. I'm gonna have to work on my skills. William Miller was an in-law of Martin Murphy, and he came across the Sierra. He was the guy who stayed with them when they were with the women and children who were at Big Bend. He went to Marin County, and he became a big deal in Marin County, big landowner, the whole shot. He comes back after becoming a famous guy, establishing schools and establishing government in Marin County. In the 1860s, he shows up again, and we'll talk about him in a future episode. He does come back. Okay, Nancy Kelsey. I have a heck of a time with Nancy Kelsey because of her husband. If you watched the news last night, El Chapo is the Colombian drug lord, and his wife was just arrested and accused of smuggling in drugs. And one would think, if your husband's a drug lord, you got to know what's going on. I would think so. Well, Nancy Kelsey's husband was not a nice guy. His name was Ben. And if you read a book, which I'm going to I'll talk about in the summary. Guy recently did a whole book about the Indian massacres or Indian situation, I want to call it that, killing in California. Now, Ben Kelsey was all over that. It was not coincidental. And even she said in her own story, talked about the various incidents she had. So because of that, or despite that, The question is, where did they go? This is where she went. And I have to read it because I can't memorize it. She lived in these places. She died in the 1880s, I believe, got there in the 1840s. She lived in these places: San Jose, Sutter's Fort, Calistoga, Clear Lake, Kelseyville, Humboldt County, Oregon, Kern County, Fresno County, Inyo County, Lompoc, Puente, LA, and the Cuyama Valley, where she is now buried. That woman got around, and I think it's because Ben got around. Because Ben, I think, was not one of the great guys. And I did think, you talk about taking down statues and stuff, she's buried on private property. But I kind of suspect she may have had her, and there's a monument there too. I think the Oregon California Trail Association provided her with a monument. That thing, something would have happened to that. I don't know. So that's where they all went. Basically, they stayed in the middle of California for the most part. Okay, things to do, and you'll get a summary of this, but this is what I would do. If I want to see some things, I'd go to Big Bend. Big Bend is easy to get to. It's a trail remnant there. There's a wagon wheel rust on the rocks. It is the original trail, and I put an asterisk there saying it's easy. It is easy. Once the snow melts, it's as easy or as hard as you want to make it. That's also where Elizabeth Yuba Murphy was born. And I went up there trying to find where the cabin was from the map of the 1846, and it was hopeless. Could not find it. Okay. Tracing the route to the pass is harder. We'll get to that in a second, but you can do it. It's just a trail, and you have to be in somewhat shape. We'll talk about that in a second. The Stevens Townsend Murphy Monument at the top of Donner Pass. We'll see that in a minute. That's easy to get to. Flat as a board. Flat as a board. Immigrant Memorial. You don't have to get out of your car to go to the Immigrant Memorial. You can drive through and look at it. And that's at the museum, Donner State Park. And the Confluence in Truckee, which I kind of like that place because nobody knows that place. You certainly can go see that too, and that's easy to get to also. Okay, the Confluence, easy to visit. Truckee is up here above the sea. This is called West River Street. The Confluence is right there. You can park right there. You can see some cars, and you can walk down there and ponder the possibilities of what Stevens Townsend Murphy did. Yeah, so that's easy to see. And you can go to the mobile home park too if you want to do one of those things. That's an easy one. The route to the pass. This isn't so easy. As I said over here, take it up or down. You need to be in at least decent shape. You can start at the top at the Pacific Coast Trailhead, or you can start at the bottom right here at the end of Donner Lake, and you just follow. It eventually became part of the Lincoln Highway, so it's not a death march. It's not that hard, but it is interesting to go up there. You see all sorts of interesting stuff, but I think the most interesting thing to do is you sit there. When you lose it, you ponder where would they go, and if you look at it by topography, you can kind of figure. You can sort of become an immigrant or a trail boss or a trail guide and figure out where to go. I highly recommend that. It's fun to do. That whole canyon up there, up the road, is just fascinating stuff. You can spend you can spend days up there. You can absolutely spend days. Okay. This is me and my, you can tell my granddaughter does not look like my part of the family. I'll read this because this kid was a trooper. This is a seminar leader exhibiting multitasking skills as he indoctrinates, I probably bored her to death, his granddaughter into the real politically correct story of the opening of the California Trail over Donner Pass, all the while reclining on the Stevens Townsend Murphy Monument. And that's what we're sitting on. My multitasking skills is shooting my mouth off to her and sitting. That's multitasking to me. There's a little monument there put by E. Clampus Vitus, and the trail and the pass goes right by it. Sometimes it's hard to find. It depends if they're doing pruning up there or not. But well, we're seeing. And again, it's a very easy walk. Very easy walk. If you want to be a heavyweight, you can follow the Immigrant Trail. Chuck Graydon wrote this book in 1986, The Trail of the First Wagons Over the Sierra, and was a great book. Has one huge problem. Here's his directions for one particular piece of trail. From the southwest end of Summit Valley, remember Summit Valley where the Yuba River goes, the trail turns south on the left side of the present road, running south out of Soda Springs. Let me tell you, you haven't lived until you go up there with your wife and you try to find this, and you're making U-turns right and left. And as you can feel, steaming personality over to my right, getting madder and madder as I make U-turns and can't find it. So you can book, I got great maps here. This is a map right here. Excellent map. You can get this in I'm sure, the Donner Park Museum. I'm sure you can. Good book, but things get better. But you can follow it better than that. Trails West publishes books, and this is in particular one is called The Truckee Trail and Nevada City Road Driving Guide. It means you don't have to get out of your car. for the most part. And we talked about these before. These monuments, this is up here. This is leaving Summit Valley. This is about 15, no more than 15 feet from the road. And I never saw it because I'd pull over and there was a telephone pole right in the way and it fit just behind the telephone pole. But if you look over here, I don't know if your pictures are in the way or not. It puts this over here. This guy, this book is longitude and latitude. If you got a GPS, and I think more and more people have those, you can go right to them. And if you notice the directions from marker T41, which is the previous one, return to the junction with the Lake Mary Road, Lincoln Highway, to 2.3 miles west to the Lake Norton Road, 0.6 to the marker on the left. The marker is 5 yards from the edge of the road in small tree near a power pole, which got in the way, mark 42. It's sitting right there. It's probably buried right now in snow. But you can follow these all the way over, all the way across to Johnson's Ranch. Great book. And if you don't get the book, if you do not, you can do other stuff. This website, this is an example of Stevens Pass up here. This is a whole different thing Larry talked about last month, Larry. I don't think Stevens Pass exists, but that's a whole nother story. We'll have to debate that one of these days. You get in their website, you look at all these, there's trail guides for all these trails. By the way, this Lassen is in the middle of Lassen Park. I was hiking and just ran right into it. There's a whole trail through Lassen Park. But they'll give you road directions to all these things. The photo tour is even better. You want to never go and pretend you did. These are pictures of the whole trail. Turkey Trail, which is the one we're talking about today. All these trails, and the California Trail is part of it. You just got pictures of the whole thing. You can spend days just looking at this if you're into that stuff. So highly recommend that particular website. The website's down here. And you can join Trails West. You can buy things from them, all sorts of stuff. Excellent, excellent source. Really like those guys. Then you can do the Oregon California Trail Association, as it says on the left, preservation, education, newsletter, and so on. octa-trails.org. You can do as much or as little as you want. I've never been able to work on one of those things. They have work parties. I never quite organized that, but I keep trying. So they're there. More than happy to talk to you. And they have markers way out in the middle of the desert. If you want to go way out in the middle of the desert. And then for those who appreciate sitting, there's always video. And this is the Forgotten Journey. And this is the story of the Stevens Townsend Murphy Party. And I will say this, not as a relative of these guys. It's pretty good. It is good. It doesn't jazz it up. It doesn't, it just tells you what took place. And you used to be able to get it on Amazon. It says they don't have it anymore, or it's out. I can't believe it's out. But if it's out, they're not going to get it anymore. But it is for sale in the museum store. Well worth seeing. If you haven't seen it, highly recommend it. I think it comes on PBS on occasion, but I wouldn't wait around for that. Which leads us to next week. Disaster on the pass. We talked about a success here. We will talk about disaster next time, and the Donner Party and popular American culture. The Donner Party never, ever, 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 ever stops. You just keep looking, you'll find Donner Party stuff forever. It's always there. So, Mr. Grove. Oh, Lori has to do that.
For those interested too, and I'm not sure how it's going to work this year, in September is a thing called the Donner Party Hike. And
Yeah.
you go to donnerpartyhike.com. It's done through Donner Summit Historical Society. And they will take you on a lot of these hikes: Donner Peak, Roller Pass, Mount Judah, Summit Valley, Lake Angela, all of those places where the Murphy Stephen Townsend went and the Donners went. I don't know if it's going to happen this year because of the pandemic. They didn't happen last year, but they've been doing it for 20 years. It's a Saturday and Sunday in September. I want to say the 18th, 19th, whatever that weekend is. And Saturday, you can pick one of the 5 hikes and go on that one. And then Sunday, it's all Donner, where they go to Alder Creek and down at the lake. So anybody interested, donnerpartyhike.com. And you can get guided tours. What do they call it? Illustrated guided tours of all these places that you've been talking about.
Yeah, I've always wanted to go on that. Every year something happens. This was gonna be my year, but now we have COVID, but
Yeah.
I keep trying. Great, thank you, Ron. So next week, notice I haven't mentioned the C word here. I'm not gonna mention the C word. I love this monument, by the way. It's another thing I'm gonna have in my backyard, the monument. And don't forget this guy on Friday, if you wanna do it.